Welcome to the Bible Study Channel. This is the systematic theology of the daily office for August 5, 2026, named Sustained and Satisfied. A person can have a full stomach and an empty trust. Psalm 78 remembers people who ate heaven's bread and still doubted the giver. Psalm 17 points in another direction. The worshipper longs to wake and be satisfied with God's likeness. Between those two kinds of satisfaction, today's readings ask what divine provision is for. Isaiah speaks to a scattered people whom God calls by name. Exodus shows hungry former slaves learning daily dependence. Matthew places a hungry crowd before Jesus, who won't send them away faint. These texts honor bodily need, but they refuse to make consumption our highest good. God feeds a people he has claimed, and the gift is meant to form trust, memory, rest, worship, and shared life. The semi-continuous track begins with Psalm 17. A worshipper asks God to hear a just cause, examine his heart, and show steadfast love. Beyond rescue, he longs to see God's face and be satisfied with God's likeness. Isaiah 43 then addresses exiled Israel. The Creator says, "I have redeemed you, I have called you by name, you are mine." God promises to stay with them through water and fire and gather their sons and daughters from every direction. The complementary track opens with Psalm 78. One generation must teach the next both God's wonders and Israel's rebellion. In the wilderness the people ask, "Can God spread a table here?" Exodus 16 tells that story from within the camp. God hears the grumbling, sends quail and manna, gives a daily portion, establishes Sabbath rest, and orders a jar kept for future generations. Both tracks end with Matthew 15. Jesus sees a crowd that has stayed for 3 days, acts from compassion, and feeds everyone through his disciples. Psalm 17 sounds like a case brought into court. The speaker asks for vindication from God's presence and invites the judge to test his heart, speech, and path. He isn't claiming sinless perfection. The prayer concerns a dispute in which he says he hasn't chosen violence or deceit. God's verdict rests on truth rather than power. Then the prayer moves from innocence to mercy. "Wondrously show your steadfast love," he asks. The Hebrew word is hesed, God's faithful covenant love. The worshipper doesn't turn good conduct into a bargaining chip. He seeks refuge in the God whose love saves. Verse 15 remains open. When I awake may mean morning after danger, renewed access to God's presence, or hope beyond death. The psalm alone doesn't establish resurrection, though Christian readers hear an eschatological echo with Daniel 12 and 1 John 3. The violent are satisfied with what this life can hold. The worshipper expects satisfaction in God's presence. Isaiah 42 ends with people blind to judgment and scattered by war. Chapter 43 begins, "But now." God calls Jacob and Israel the people he created and formed. This covenant language addresses a people, not a private assurance detached from Israel's story. "I have redeemed you, I have called you by name, you are mine." Redemption here looks toward release from exile and a new gathering from east, west, north, and south. The images recall the Exodus, but the promise doesn't say Israel will avoid deep water or fire. God says, "I will be with you when those trials come." Divine presence grounds courage. Belonging also has a purpose. Sons and daughters are gathered because they bear God's name and were formed for God's glory. Election is gift and vocation. Israel exists to praise and witness to the Holy One who saves. The Church reads this promise through Israel's Messiah without erasing Israel. Before the wilderness asks what can be found to eat, God tells his people whose they are. Exodus 16 takes hunger seriously. The people have left Egypt's food system and entered a wilderness where they can't see tomorrow's meal. Their memory, though, has already edited slavery. Egypt becomes the place where they sat by meat pots and ate their fill. Fear can make bondage look secure. God hears the complaint before the people learn to speak faithfully. Quail cover the camp. When the dew lifts, fine flakes lie on the ground. The people ask, "Man who, what is it?" Moses answers, "It is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat." Manna is both gift and training. Each household gathers what it needs. Hoarding spoils. On the 6th day there is enough for Sabbath. Rest depends on trusting that life continues when gathering stops. The lection skips the middle regulations, but they show the gift's social shape. The one who gathered much had no excess, and the one who gathered little had no lack. Paul quotes that line in 2 Corinthians 8 when he asks churches to share resources. A preserved jar then turns daily bread into public memory. Providence feeds bodies, limits anxious accumulation, protects rest, and teaches a community what enough can mean. Psalm 78 retells the wilderness so children yet unborn won't repeat it. The psalm doesn't condemn hunger. Scripture's laments teach hungry and frightened people to cry out. The sin appears in verse 22, Israel didn't believe God or trust His saving power. After water flowed from the rock, each new need became another demand that God prove Himself. The psalm combines memories of manna and quail from Exodus and Numbers. God commands the skies, directs the winds, and fills the camp. Yet the selected verses stop at an uneasy line, He gave them what they craved. The next verses speak of judgment while food is still in their mouths. Later the psalm says God was compassionate, restrained anger, and remembered that they were flesh. Sin can turn a creaturely appetite into a verdict on God's character. It can receive abundance without gratitude and remember Egypt more fondly than deliverance. The cure isn't contempt for the body. It is truthful memory that lets past mercy interpret present need. A full stomach can't create faith, but remembered grace can teach desire where to place its hope. Matthew says Jesus has compassion on the crowd. The Greek verb describes pity felt in the depths of the body. Jesus notices that these people have stayed 3 days and may collapse on the road home. No one has to persuade Him. His compassion begins the meal. Jesus has just answered a Canaanite woman's faith, healed many people, and received praise directed to the God of Israel. Mark places the parallel episode in the Decapolis. Many in this crowd were probably Gentiles, though Matthew doesn't label every person. Israel's Messiah is spreading a wilderness table beyond familiar boundaries. 7 loaves and a few fish pass through Thanksgiving in the hands of Jesus. Everyone eats and is satisfied, and 7 large baskets remain. 7 may suggest fullness, but elaborate claims about the 7 nations of Canaan go beyond what Matthew states. Jesus does what Israel's scriptures attribute to God's provision. He feeds a multitude in a desolate place. Moses requested bread from God. Under Jesus' compassionate authority, bread multiplies. Jesus gives the bread to the disciples, and the disciples give it to the crowds. They don't create abundance, but they aren't spectators. Christ's compassion takes material form through their hands. The church receives from Christ, gives thanks, and distributes what belongs to Him. The verbs took, gave thanks, broke, and gave also appear in accounts of the Lord's Supper. Sacramental traditions hear a clear Eucharistic resonance here. Other interpreters begin with physically hungry people receiving food. Those readings needn't cancel each other. The Lord who gives Himself sacramentally is the same Lord who refuses to treat an empty stomach as irrelevant. The church can't multiply bread by its own power, and prayer doesn't excuse neglect. It can place what it has in Christ's service, organize distribution, and make room at the table for people kept at the edges. Ministry joins proclamation to embodied mercy because the incarnate Christ cares whether the crowd can make it home. God's claim comes before the wilderness test. Isaiah's exiles are created, redeemed, and called by name before they pass through water and fire. Need doesn't decide whether they belong to God. Promise and presence give them an identity from which to face it. Providence preserves life while forming daily trust, limiting hoarding, protecting rest, and leaving a memory for children. Psalm 78 warns that a gift can be consumed without faith when desire forgets the saving God. Provision exposes the heart even as it feeds the body. In Jesus, the Holy One's compassion has a human voice in human hands. He sees hunger, provides in the wilderness, welcomes a crowd across familiar boundaries, and includes disciples in the distribution. The meal anticipates the kingdom's wide table without turning bodily bread into a disposable symbol. Psalm 17 names the end toward which every lesser gift points. God's people seek the face of the one who knows them. Bread sustains the journey, God is its destination. We are named by grace, sustained by providence, and finally satisfied in communion with God. Bring bodily need to God without embarrassment. Exodus doesn't hide hunger, and Psalm 17 doesn't soften danger. Honest complaint can turn toward God in trust. Watch for the moment fear rewrites bondage as safety or treats today's need as proof that every former mercy was false. Practice receiving enough. The manna story questions scarcity, panic, and accumulation without limit. Build Sabbath into life as a confession that God remains God while you stop producing. Let daily bread shape a budget that includes someone else's hunger. Churches can pray for provision and still maintain food pantries, mutual aid funds, shared meals, and partnerships that preserve a neighbor's dignity. Keep a jar of memory. Tell children and new believers where provision came from, including the times God's people complained, hoarded, or forgot. A polished story can't teach trust. Then look at what is already in your hands. The disciples brought 7 loaves, received them back from Jesus, and carried them into the crowd. Christ supplies what the church cannot create. He sends the church to distribute his gifts until hungry people know that compassion has come near. Thank you for studying with us today. If this helped you understand the scriptures, please like and subscribe. We will see you tomorrow.